Welcome to the Public Housing Authority, or PHA Board of Commissioner training. This training is meant as both an initial training video and refresh. Welcome to the Public Housing Authority, or PHA Board of Commissioner training. This training is meant as both an initial training. Welcome to the Public Housing Authority, or PHA Board of Commissioner training. This training is meant as both an initial training video and refresher for the Board of Commissioners and employees. We hope this training will help you and the organization understand the following: what a public housing authority is, its purpose, its basis in federal and state law, and relationship to local governments. Overview of the two major programs administered by PHAs, PH and HCV, and the laws governing them. Board of Commissioner role and responsibilities, including role in establishing the local policies. HUD's role and responsibilities. Meetings, minutes, agendas, and state requirements. Open records and open meetings. And personal identifiable information. Provide an understanding that there's an expectation from your residents, your community. Importance of 1937 Housing Act and subsequent laws and amendments. Our country's leaders recognize the need for a federal role in development of affordable housing as a means to combat poverty. The effects resulting from years of depression and joblessness showed the importance of having a housing safety net for the most vulnerable of society. The elderly, disabled, families with children, enabling them to rent decent units affordably. Whether you're homeless, living in unsanitary and unsafe housing, or having to pay half or more of your paycheck, the lack of affordable, decent housing is a primary need in order to survive and grow. The 1937 Act allowed for federal funds to support creation of federal, state, and local level partnerships to build and support affordable, modest, decent, safe, and sanitary housing for low-income families. The federal agency of the Department of Housing and Urban Development was later created to oversee the federal funding and programs and work with PHAs to undertake a variety of housing-related programs and family self-sufficiency opportunity programs. What is a PHA? A PHA, or Public Housing Authority, is an instrument of the governmental entity which created it. Housing authorities are created or powers exercised when there's been a determination of the need for such authority to eliminate slum housing. They retain the authority for appointments to the PHA Board. By virtue of its creation in state law, PHA is a governmental entity for purpose of paying taxes and ability to enter into intergovernmental agreements for purchasing, procurements, and obtaining services. As a public body, the PHA is subject to state and local laws governing open meetings and records. PHA must also protect private information obtained and covered under the Federal Privacy Act. Employee records, including emails, notes, letters, and recorded conversations, are subject to open records. Cell phones owned or stipends supported by the Housing Authority are also subject to open records. Public housing authorities can undertake other housing and non-housing related programs allowed under state and federal law. This includes financing, planning, undertaking, constructing, or operating a housing project or projects, and home ownership programs, property management, security and crime prevention programs, supportive service and tenant opportunities, housing authority consulting and management, and economic and self-sufficiency programs. The use of HUD funds has limitations. PHAs may also form partnerships with governmental agencies, nonprofits, and private organizations to mutually achieve goals under joint powers agreements, consortiums, and other legally binding agreements. There are two main programs of a PHA: public housing and Section 8 vouchers. PHAs assist eligible low-income families under 80th percentile of median family income in renting PHA-owned housing covered under an annual contributions contract with HUD. Financial assistance from HUD includes operating subsidy, capital funds, and other special purpose grants awarded to the PHA. The PHA operates the program through dwelling rent income, operating subsidy from HUD, and other income generated by the PHA or property. Higher long-term vacancies, high turnover rates, poor management and maintenance, and competition with other affordable housing options all impact the ability of the PHA to achieve its mission. Who is the owner? PHA Board is the owner of the property. As the owner, the board is responsible for and accountable for the actions of the PHA. HUD, the residents served under your programs, and the community which you represent expect that the collective board will act in the best interest of the PHA in performing your duties. PHAs that have PH are in the business of leasing residential property, and as such, it's really important for employees, ED, property managers, even maintenance, to understand the lease provisions, laws governing the business, fair housing laws, process for enforcing lease eviction, your marketplace, and good business practices. As owners of the property, the board must ensure that its assets are adequately protected through insurance, sound and quality business practices for managing, maintaining, and modernizing its property, and by complying with regulatory requirements of the program and applicable state or local requirements. PH is not an entitlement program. Families must qualify and meet local PHA standards in order to reside. Basic qualifications, Social Security number, citizenship, meet family definition, specific criminal history, lifetime sex offender, eviction from federally assisted housing for drug-related criminal activity, manufacture of methamphetamines, violent criminals, and family income is below the income limits for your area. It's up to the PHA to adopt admission, screening, and occupancy policies and to follow the policies put in place. Criteria should be based on ability to uphold essential lease obligations. For example, paying rent on time, no history of damaging, destroying premises, or those who can't live peaceably with other residents, and other criminal activity beyond federal requirements. As a result of changing market or local needs, PHAs may remove units from rent roll to use for other purposes, such as employee units, non-dwelling purposes, renting to over-income families, only available to PHAs with less than 250 units, or use for non-residential purposes, police substation, supportive services for residents, child care center, barber or beauty shop, computer lab, etc. Recognize that PHAs must generate sufficient funds to operate the property. The U.S. Housing Act of 1937 created housing assistance programs. Additional acts and program mergers continue to change how housing assistance works. The Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998 changed many regulations for housing authorities, such as requiring community service for public housing residents, flat rent options, criminal background screenings, 5-year and annual plans, and others. Congress is the funding source for programs and, as such, imparts its priorities through enactment of laws and funding of HUD programs. HUD is the federal agency with responsibilities for development of regulatory requirements as a result of laws and has enforcement responsibilities. The Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program, or simply known as vouchers or Section 8, is a housing assistance program that's tied to the household and not the unit. Each family under the program must contribute towards their rent and utilities. Typically, it's 30% of adjusted gross income, annual income minus certain deductions, out-of-pocket medical, elderly disabled, dependent, child care, handicapped assistance expense. Family qualifies for multiply by 0.30 total tenant payment. If family chooses to rent a unit where gross rent and utilities, is above payment standard, the family pays for the difference. Things to consider are whether families are able to rent decent units in the market within the payment standards set by the PHA, as opposed to making a choice to pay additional out-of-pocket amounts for a nicer place. Eligible families are issued a Housing Choice Voucher, HCV, and search for housing in the community, or in some cases anywhere in the United States. The PHA is not a party to the lease. The lease is a written contract between the family and the property owner. Each state has tenant-landlord laws which regulate the lease agreements. It provides certain rights for each party, as well as provisions for enforcement. HUD requires that for each lease executed on the program, that a HUD-required tenancy addendum form be attached to the lease. It further requires standard protections and expectations on both parties of the lease. The voucher that the PHA issues to the family is the contract for family responsibilities under the program. The Housing Assistance Payment Contract is between eligible families are issued a Housing Choice Voucher, HCV, and search for housing in the community, or in some cases anywhere in the United States. The PHA is not a party to the lease. The lease is a written contract between the family and the property owner. Each state has tenant-landlord laws which regulate the lease agreements. It provides certain rights for each party, as well as provisions for enforcement. HUD requires that for each lease executed on the program, that a HUD-required tenancy addendum form be attached to the lease. It further requires standard protections and expectations on both parties of the lease. The voucher that the PHA issues to the family is the contract for family responsibilities under the program. The Housing Assistance Payment Contract is between the PHA and the property. Housing units supported by public assistance must meet minimum property standards and be inspected. The Uniform Physical Condition or standards and other inspections are required by HUD, may not be as strict as local code. It is important to understand if there are certain code. Each state legislature was required to enact municipal housing laws to establish the powers and authority of the PHA. Further, each community you represent would have had to determine the need for the PHA and created the PHA and authorized it to transact business. Housing authority law will identify the powers and authority of the PHA, PHA purpose and responsibilities, board member qualifications, and other requirements. The North Dakota Century Code 23-11 establishes public housing authorities. Code 23-11-05 allows the governing body to create a commission and gives that commission its legal authority. Code 23-11-07 establishes the powers of commissioners of authority. The powers of each authority must be vested in the commissioners of the authority. The authority may delegate to one or more of its agents or employees such powers and duties as it deems proper. North Dakota Century Code also sets parameters for conflicts of interest of the Board of Commissioners. Code 23-11-09 states that a commissioner or employee may not have an interest in a housing project or property to be used. No commissioner or employee of an authority may acquire any direct or indirect interest in any housing project or in any property included or plan to be included in any project, nor may such a person have any direct or indirect interest in any contract or proposed contract for materials or services to be furnished or used in connection with any housing project. If any commissioner or employee of an authority owns or controls a direct or indirect interest in any property included or planned to be included in any housing project, that person immediately shall disclose the same in writing to the authority, and such disclosure must be entered upon the minutes of the authority. Failure to disclose such interest constitutes misconduct in office. In addition to the North Dakota Century Code, HUD can disqualify a board member for a conflict of interest or apparent conflict of interest. The Public Housing Authority could be required to remove the board member and search for a replacement. HUD may prevent any board member from becoming employed by the Housing Authority. There are many important documents for a housing authority, none more important than the organization documents. This document is usually held by the governing body, such as the county commission or county auditor's office. Cooperation agreements, interagency agreements with other organizations, and contracts with HUD. Agreement between the PHA and local governing body in a form prescribed by HUD relative to the cooperation in the development and operation of the project or projects, and the obligation of the PHA for payments in lieu of taxes. Due to the exemption of the project from all real and personal property taxes, HUD approval is required to terminate or amend the agreement. HUD approval is required if the legal status of the PHA changes. The bylaws of the PHA will include the authority name, office location and hours of operation, PHA meetings, types, time and location, officer positions, board duties and elections, and provisions for amending bylaws. An annual contributions contractor, ACC, is the official and authorized HUD contract to provide funding for the Housing Authority. The PHA Board of Commissioners is the group that governs the established Housing Authority. Often, Board of Commissioners may refer to themselves as board members. However, the North Dakota Century Code refers to them as commissioners. Powers of a housing authority shall be exercised by the Commission of the PHA. It's the board's responsibility to act in the best interest of the PHA. The board's role. The board is responsible for securing the management of the PHA and ensuring that PHA operations are undertaken in accordance with the laws and program requirements and the board's priorities and policies. The board must fully consider and evaluate all available options: hire staff, contract for management, intergovernmental agency agreement, consortia, etc., for efficient operation of PHA. Select a qualified director or administrator. Have a clear understanding of the skills and qualifications needed, duties to be performed, compensation to be provided, and other terms and conditions of employment or contract. It is the board's responsibility to monitor and evaluate performance. Remember that the director administrator works for the board and not the other way around. The Board of Commissioners is responsible for the fiscal policy and accountability of the Housing Authority. Commissioners will approve, review, and monitor budgets, contracts, and other financial documents to ensure expenditures are in compliance with federal and local laws or other requirements, and otherwise follow good business practices for safeguarding the financial integrity of the PHA and preventing fraud, waste, mismanagement, and abuse. PHAs must develop an annual plan and 5-year plan in consultation with its resident advisory board, state and public. The annual plan, 5-year plan, payment standards, and civil rights certifications require public comment periods and board resolutions for approval. The Board of Commissioners will need to evaluate the following items annually: housing needs, waiting list including site-based, policies for deconcentration, eligibility, and rent determinations, grievances, pets, community service and self-sufficiency, homeownership programs, designated housing, project-based assistance, conversion of public housing to tenant-based assistance, and capital improvement funding, including demolition and disposition. The Executive Director and Board of Commissioners needs to set the PHA's mission, goals, and plan. It is imperative that the Housing Authority fully reviews these documents annually and adjusts the plan to local conditions. A Board of Commission can establish local discretionary policies with HUD guidance and approval. Policies are board adopted and spell out expectations with respect to operation of the PHA and its programs. Internal procedures may be developed which spells out how staff will accomplish. Consider local needs and conditions, priorities, goals, and resources. As laws or program requirements change, or as PHA circumstances warrant, policies, plans, and goals should be reviewed, and if necessary, revised. Local policies cannot violate or create fair housing issues. It is best to consult with your HUD representative prior to finalizing any new local policies. The role of the Executive Director. The Executive Director runs the day-to-day administration and leadership of the PHA and its programs, and provides contact with HUD Regional about local issues. The Executive Director will conduct hiring, training, supervision, and termination of PHA staff, procurement of goods and contracts, prepare budgets and policies, and authorize access to PHA records. In addition, the executive director helps enforce all lease or housing assistance contracts, monitors operation for fraud and abuse, and maintains compliance with federal, state, and local laws. The executive director needs to keep the PHA commissioners informed of any problems such as audit concerns, legal issues, major resident issues, financial status, changes to law, and other important issues. An executive director may conduct or arrange a grievance or informal hearing that allows a fair hearing. The party conducting the grievance hearing or informal review should be impartial and must not have been involved in the original decision or be a subordinate of that person. HUD has many tools that assess the PHA's performance and compliance. Many housing authorities are subject to annual quality control items and financial audits. The PHA will be evaluated based on monitoring, inspections, communications, audits, reviews, and other reports. The board members are the community's representative and should pursue all complaints regarding the executive director or staff. Board meetings. During the board meeting, it is important to remember it's a business meeting, conducted in a business-like manner. Most PHAs use parliamentary procedures. Meetings should be productive, exchanging ideas, deliberation, and taking action, and not be used for gathering information. Board members should be free to ask questions and discuss financial aspects, policies, and operations during the meeting. The executive director needs to make sure the board is well informed prior to the meeting. Unless another person is appointed or identified in the bylaws, the executive director serves as the secretary of the board. Each board member was appointed for their perspective. Be respectful. Explain each item and do not use acronyms that the board and general public do not understand. Ensure board meetings are open to the public and create an atmosphere that is inviting to residents and the general public. Board members serve as the community's representative. Be responsive to concerns raised by clients, partners, community members, and officials, and otherwise be an advocate of the PHA. Have a process in place for hearing and resolving complaints brought to the board. It is important to note the public does not have a right to speak. However, they do have the right to be there and see and hear, give copy of agenda. Understand your state open meetings law. Remember, all board information is public information, and you should refrain from using and discussing personal identifiable information during a meeting or even in a sidebar discussion. Board members should not be presented with information that is private, that is available for the public, such as list of applicants on the waiting list, anything with Social Security or EIN numbers, employee home addresses or private contact information, client names or addresses, or stories or tales about specific clients or applicants. In general, think if you'd want that same information released during a public meeting if it was about you. Board of Commissioners and Public Housing Authority employees should be mindful that policies are for everyone and that you must follow fair housing laws. Discussion should never exclude or create hardship on any particular group and can result in penalties or lawsuits. All board discussions should be documented in minutes and made available to the public. Notice of board meetings, agendas, board minutes, and resolutions are official records of the board's proceedings, and as such should clearly and accurately reflect the board's undertakings. Care must be taken to safeguard the official records of the board's actions. Meeting notices must comply with Voting on resolutions or other actions is only permitted when a quorum, majority of the board members, is established. A majority vote is required to pass a resolution. Resolutions should follow a common legal pattern. If needed, ask the local state's attorney or another housing authority for assistance in drafting a resolution. When you plan the board meetings, it should follow the bylaws. The board and others should have a calendar well in advance. The bylaws will dictate the schedule of election of officers and open public hearings. An agenda needs to be available early and posted in a public place. The board should have the agenda along with their information for financial reports and other reports with sufficient time to review. The Public Housing Authority's bylaws is an important document that sets many things for the agency. Bylaws will establish frequency of board meetings, location of meetings, date and time of meetings, meeting attendance policy, regular agenda, office hours and location, officers required, if the chairperson can vote and when, and other items that the Housing Authority wishes to be designated. The Housing Authority can use technology such as email, fax, conference call for more efficient communications. Board meetings can also be done in person, online, and via conference call. Meetings that allow other communication must publish those methods and make them available for the public to join. The chairperson is the person in charge of the board meetings and agenda. The chairperson exercises control over the meeting, establishes whether a quorum is met, or if there are enough board members present, and recognizes visitors and welcomes them. Members of the public do not sit with the board, nor do invited guests, attorney, accountant, auditor, etc., until such time as the chairperson invites. Visitors should identify themselves and record their name and address. Visitor information does not need to be published unless they request to speak. In addition, the chairperson controls the meetings by calling the meeting to order, adjourning the meeting once business is done, following the agenda, ensuring all members have input, calling for votes, and allowing all discussions to happen in an orderly fashion. The agenda should have all items clearly identified along with the meeting date, time, location, and alternative communication, conference call, or online meeting link. The agenda should follow the pattern established in the bylaws. The board should finish any old business prior to discussing new business and make sure the board is educated on any housing authority developments. The board and executive director should refrain from using or discussing information that might be considered personal identifiable information. This includes client names and specifics, waiting list numbers. The board and executive director should refrain from using or discussing information that might be considered personal identifiable information. This includes client names and specifics, waiting list numbers, waiting list. Board meetings need to be published in a timely fashion after the meeting and considered a drafted copy until approved at the following meeting. The minutes should include the date, time, meeting type, attendance, the executive director's report, motions, and their disposition, notations, and general notes. The minutes should refrain from including dialogue unless it is recorded and verified that the minutes and dialogue are correct. The governing board may require the housing authority to submit the board minutes after each meeting. Here are a few other important items to remember. Each housing authority should have an ethics policy and internal control policies and procedures. The board should review the ethics policy and internal controls on an annual basis and make adjustments as necessary. If there's an ethics violation or question, the board will either investigate, call HUD, or contact the local state's attorney for any investigations. Board resolutions are required in order to approve certain HUD documents and some important documents. The resolution should follow the legal language used at county commission meetings and highlight the reasons for the resolution and legal authorization. Contact your HUD representative if you have a question, if a board member or simple board vote is required for an item. There are some federal requirements for financial reviews. Even if a housing authority is not required to have a full audit, it is best that the board review the financials on an ongoing and annual basis. There is a federal requirement that any federally assisted program receiving $750,000 or more in federal funds have an annual audit. Some programs may require audits regarding funding amounts. Each housing authority needs to submit an annual report to the board and governing body. This annual report can be the financial statements. Housing assistance programs funded by HUD are controlled by HUD through federal regulations and contracts. A local housing authority has the privilege to administer the program locally. Any disputes or noncompliance with HUD could result in fines, sanctions, or cancellation of the contract. Housing authorities must provide equal housing opportunities and display the Equal Housing Opportunity logo. This means the housing authority must follow fair housing laws and rules, provide clients with proper contacts, and create fair, consistent, and equal policies and procedures. As a Board of Commissioner, if you spot or suspect fraud or program misuse, it is your duty to report it to the proper authorities. Board of Commissioners and the public can request financial documents and other information which needs to be presented in a timely manner. Board of Commissioners can contact the HUD Fargo representative to review information, HUD Denver, or the county state's attorney. Just remember what your service on the board means to your community. Your service helps house those in need in your community with housing assistance. With your service, families have a home and hope.